My daughter left me at the San Antonio airport in 101-degree heat 5 hours before my flight. She didn't get out of the car. She didn't help me with my bag. She didn't even take off her seatbelt. She just sat behind the wheel, popped the trunk, and said, "Dad, out." I pulled my suitcase out of the trunk. Then I asked her, "You're not coming in with me?" She kept staring straight ahead. She never once looked at me. "You've got 5 hours. You're a grown man. Walk in." Then she shut the trunk. The car pulled away, merged into 3 lanes of traffic outside the terminal, and disappeared. No goodbye. No hug. She never looked back. But that isn't the part that hurt the most. It took me 12 days to find out why Tessa wanted me out of San Antonio that badly. And when I did, I understood something. What happened at that airport wasn't a bad moment. It was planned. My name is Rollie Kaskinen. Everybody who's known me longer than about a minute calls me Rollie. I'm 69 years old, and I live in Duluth, Minnesota, in a house on Vermilion Road up in Lakeside that I bought in 1987 and paid off in 2004. For 36 years, I was a certified welding inspector and non-destructive testing technician, shipyard work mostly, down on the harbor, ore boats, tank farms out on Rice's Point. Some bridge work when the state needed hands. What that job actually is, if you've never met anybody who does it, is this. I spent 36 years finding cracks that nobody could see with their eyes. Ultrasound. Dye penetrant. Magnetic particle. A hull looks perfectly fine, and you run the probe along a weld seam, and the screen tells you there's a fracture in there running 11 inches you'd never have known about until the day it came apart in a February gale. That was my whole working life, finding the flaw before it becomes the failure. I want you to hold on to that, because it comes back in a way I did not see coming, and when it did come back, it took the legs out from under me. I'm going to tell you this whole thing straight, and I want to warn you now that there's a part near the end where I come off worse than my daughter does. Not worse than what she did. Worse than times she did it. I'm leaving it in, because that part is the only reason I bothered telling anybody this at all. Let me back up. My wife Junie died 4 years ago in February. Pancreatic. 11 weeks between the diagnosis and the funeral, which everybody tells you is a mercy, and which I still have not agreed to. We were married 39 years. She used to say I was the only man in Minnesota who could find a defect in anything except his own family, and she'd say it laughing, and it turns out she was right about the second half. Tessa is my only child. She's 41. She lives in Muria. She lives outside San Antonio in a place called Stone Oak, married 11 years to a man named Brant Vaughn. Brant runs an outfit called Vaughn Meridian Partners. Self-storage and what he calls flex industrial, which as near as I could ever tell means metal buildings you rent to small businesses. My grandson Sawyer is 14, and he is far and away the best thing that family has produced, and I'll get to why that matters. After Junie died, Tessa called every Sunday for about 6 months, then every other Sunday, then once a month. Then it became a text around 9 at night that said, "Times. Thinking about you, Dad, times," with a little heart on it. And I have come to understand that 9 at night is when people send messages they are hoping you won't call back. I'd been invited to San Antonio exactly once in the 4 years since the funeral, and that was for Sawyer's confirmation, and I paid for my own hotel. So when Tessa called me on a Tuesday afternoon in August and said, "Dad, come down for Labor Day weekend, just us. Sawyer's been asking about you," I about dropped the phone into the sink. I booked it that same night. Sun Country, Duluth to Minneapolis to San Antonio, seat 21D, $412 round trip. And I remember standing at my kitchen counter with my reading glasses on thinking that Junie had something to do with this, like she'd reached over from wherever she is and knocked something loose. I want you to remember that I thought that. It matters later, and not in a good way. Tessa picked me up at baggage claim on Friday wearing sunglasses, indoors, which should have told me something. She hugged me the way you hug a coworker at a retirement party. Quick, one arm, over before it starts. Sawyer wasn't with her. "He's got a thing," she said. Sawyer did not have a thing. Sawyer was home all weekend, and asked me on Saturday morning why nobody had let him come to the airport. Small lie, meaningless lie, the kind you don't even notice at the time. But I've spent my life around welds, and I'll tell you something about a bad joint. It almost never fails at the big obvious spot. It fails at the little inclusion nobody bothered to grind out, because that's where the stress finds a place to start. Friday and Saturday were fine. Strange, but fine. Brant smoked a brisket Saturday and talked for the better part of 40 minutes about a development out toward Bourne he kept calling the anchor asset. He said that phrase 3 separate times. Anchor asset. He said it like a man practicing for somebody who wasn't me. And Sunday evening, Sawyer took me out to the back patio and showed me his weather station. He'd built the whole thing himself. Anemometer out of PVC and 3 cut-down plastic cups on a spindle, a barometer, a humidity sensor he'd wired to a little board, and a laptop where he'd been logging readings every 15 minutes since March. He was explaining dew point to me. 14 years old, sitting on a patio in the dark, holding a flashlight in his teeth so he could see his own wiring, telling his grandfather about the difference between relative humidity and dew point and why one of them actually tells you something and the other one mostly doesn't. And I felt something come loose in my chest that hadn't come loose in about 4 years. Because that boy wanted me there. Not for anything. He just wanted somebody to show it to. Remember that patio. We're coming back to it. Sunday night, after Sawyer went up, Tessa and Brant sat me down at the kitchen island with a manila folder and a glass of wine I had not asked for and do not drink. Brant did the talking. Rollie, we wanted to grab you while you're down here. It's about estate planning. Protecting the house up there, keeping it clean, no probate mess for anybody down the road. And he slid that folder across the granite toward me like a man handing over a quarterly report. I opened it. Inside was a document. Across the top it said Times quitclaim deed with retained life estate. My address on Vermilion Road typed out underneath. And below my signature line there were 2 more. One for Tessa. One for Brant. It just adds us on, Tessa said. Fast. Too fast. The way people talk when they've got the next 4 sentences already loaded. Nothing changes for you, Dad. You live there exactly the same. It just keeps it out of probate court when the time comes. Everybody does this now. Now I want to be very clear about something, because people get this wrong when I tell it. I was not offended by the idea of estate planning. I'm 69 years old. I know how those conversations are supposed to go. I'd already had one 4 years earlier with my own attorney, a woman named Dot Hyvärinen who's had an office on Superior Street since 1994 and who drew up a perfectly good will after Junie died. That's not what bothered me. What bothered me was the folder. That document was Times prepared, notarized block already on it, my address already typed. Sitting in a manila folder in a house 2,000 miles from my lawyer, on a weekend I happened to be a captive guest in a spare bedroom. That folder existed before I booked the flight. I looked at it for a while and then I said the only reasonable thing there was to say. I'd like Dot to read it first, that's all. Just want her eyes on it before I sign anything. The temperature in that kitchen dropped about 15 degrees. Dad, it's a standard form. You don't need a lawyer for a standard form. Then it won't take her long. And Brant's jaw did a small tight thing, and he said, we were kind of hoping to have it squared before you fly out. There's a closing timing issue on our end. It's complicated. Closing timing. I filed that phrase away without having any idea what I'd just filed. I didn't sign it. I told them I loved them, and I told them I'd have Dot look it over Monday, and I went to the guest room. And I lay in that bed until nearly 2 in the morning listening to 2 people argue 3 rooms away in the low voices people use when they think everyone's asleep. I couldn't make out a single word, just tone. And tone, after 36 years of listening to a probe read a seam, is a thing I have gotten unfortunately good at. If you have ever lain awake in somebody else's house listening to a sound you weren't supposed to hear and told yourself you were imagining the shape of it, you already know exactly how that night went. Monday morning she was different. Not rude. Efficient. Like I'd stopped being her father and become an item on a list that needed closing out. She told me my flight had been moved up 2 hours because of a schedule change. That was not true. I want to say that plainly. My flight left exactly when it was always going to leave. I confirmed it later on the airline's own site, and the departure time never changed by a minute. But I didn't know that yet. So I repacked in 11 minutes, while Sawyer stood in the kitchen doorway in his school clothes saying, "Wait, Grandpa's leaving times now? I thought we were doing the weather thing again tonight." And nobody answered him. Nobody answered that boy. I've thought about that more than almost anything else from that weekend. The drive to the airport took 22 minutes. She didn't put the radio on. I asked about Sawyer's science fair. I got 4 words. I asked how Brant's project was going, and I got 2. And then Terminal A, departures, and the trunk popped, and I got out into 101 degrees. Now I want to slow this all the way down, because it took maybe 90 seconds, and I have been over it more times than I want to tell you. I pulled my suitcase out, set it on the sidewalk, reached back in for my carry-on, and my hand came out with a bundle of plastic dry cleaning bags, instead 4 of Brant's dress shirts on wire hangers that had somehow gotten laid across my bag in the trunk. And I stood there holding them up, hooked over 2 fingers, and I bent down toward the passenger window and said, "These are Brant's. You want to take them back?" And Tessa looked straight ahead through the windshield. Didn't take her sunglasses off, didn't take her seatbelt off. Engine running. And she said, "It's 5 hours, Dad. You're a grown man." And she pulled out. I want to be honest about what I did next, which is nothing. I did not shout after her. I did not chase the car. I did not do one single thing. I stood on that curb in the heat holding 2 bags and 4 shirts belonging to a man who wasn't there, and I watched a silver SUV get absorbed into 3 lanes of airport traffic. 35 minutes. That's how long I stood there before anything else happened. I know because I looked at my watch when she pulled away, and I looked at it again after. Skycaps went around me. A family came past with matching suitcases, and a kid dragging a stuffed dinosaur by the tail. Somebody's horn went twice, short and irritated. My shirt was through at the collar in about 4 minutes. And I'll tell you the thought I had, standing there, and it's the one that still gets me. I reached for my phone to call Junie. Not consciously. Pure muscle. 40 years of times, let me tell you what just happened. I had it out of my pocket, and my thumb was already moving before I remembered. 4 years. It still happens maybe twice a year. That was one of them. If you have ever reached for somebody who isn't there anymore, in the exact moment you needed them most, you already know there is no bottom under that. You just keep going. I sat down on a concrete bench under an overhang because my legs had started to feel unreliable. And that's when somebody said my name. Mr. Kaskinen. Nobody has called me Mr. Kaskinen in about 15 years. I looked up expecting to have to explain that they had the wrong man. There was a fellow in his mid-40s coming toward me from the terminal doors with a black carry-on. Good jacket. The kind of face you can't place because your version of it is 20 years younger. "Emeka," he said. "Emeka Oduya. You hired me in 2001. And there it was. Emeka Oduya. 22 years old the last time I really knew him. Kid came out of a 2-year technical program with a certificate, and about half the confidence he should have had. I put him on the harbor crew, and I made him shadow me for 18 months. And I was hard on him, and I want to be honest that I was harder on him than I was on the other new hires. And I've thought since about whether that was fair. He left in 2007 for something down south. I remember being proud and a little sorry watching him go. The way you feel about a kid you didn't raise walking out the door anyway." "Emeka," I said, "my God. What are you doing sitting out here in this?" he said. And then he actually looked at me, properly. The 2 bags. 4 shirts in dry cleaning plastic that obviously weren't mine. Whatever was showing on my face that I was pretty sure I had under control. His whole expression changed. "Mr. Kaskinen, what's going on?" I told him the short version, because I did not have the energy to dress it up. My daughter dropped me here 5 hours early and drove off. He listened without cutting in once. The same way he used to listen when I stood over him at a fillet weld explaining why he was going to grind it out and do it again. Then he said, "That's not all right, sir. I don't care what's going on with her." And I said, "She's got a lot on her plate." 69 years old, and I still could not stop defending my own daughter. To a man who used to bring me coffee at 7:15 in the morning. Emeka didn't argue with me. He just looked at me in a way that told me he didn't believe one word of it. Then he said, "Come on. My flight's not for 3 hours. There's a place past security with air conditioning and chairs, and you're going to sit in one, and you're going to tell me what's actually happening." And then he said the thing that stopped me. "And then I'm going to tell you why I've had somebody looking for you since June." Looking for me? Since June. We got through security and sat down at a place near gate B6 with 2 coffees and a basket of fries. Neither of us wanted, but both of us needed something to do with. And here's what Emeka Odia told me. He runs an inspection firm now. North Line Inspection Group. Headquarters in Houston. Office here in San Antonio. Another one in Oklahoma City. 84 employees. Weld inspection, NDT, third-party quality assurance, and a forensic division that does expert testimony on construction failure cases. He started it in 2013 with 2 trucks and a line of credit. I had no idea, I said, and I meant it, and something about saying it out loud made me feel very small. Sir, I built it on you, he said. And he said it plainly, not sentimentally, which is how I knew he meant it. Every procedure I put in front of my techs, I learned on the harbor from you. Every time one of my people wants to pass something marginal, and I make them redo it, that's your voice, not a code book. I have told that story at 3 conferences. Then he said, in June I got asked to give the keynote at the North American Non-Destructive Testing Conference, Kansas City, February, and they asked me to name somebody for the mentorship award they give out alongside it. He looked at me. I gave them your name. I've had my operations manager trying to find your contact information since June because the yard I worked at doesn't exist under that name anymore, and nobody had a forwarding address for you. I sat there with a cup of coffee halfway to my face and I could not say one word. Since June. So let me make sure I have this, I said finally. While I was sitting on a bench out there wondering if my daughter was ever going to answer her phone, you were on an airplane coming here, and somebody has been trying to find me for 2 months to tell me I mattered. Junie would have called that something, Emeka said, and he remembered her name. From a company Christmas party in 2004, I had to look at the fries for a second. We talked almost 2 hours, about the award, about the conference, about wanting me there in February as his guest, whether I ever said yes to anything else or not. And somewhere in there he asked, almost offhand, what had brought me down to San Antonio in the first place. So I told him. The folder, the deed, the blank signature lines, the phrase times closing timing. Emeka went quiet, in a way that made the back of my neck go cold. Sir, Vaughn Meridian Partners. He said it carefully. Is that the burn project? The storage and flex campus, Kestrel Crossing. My stomach dropped about a foot. That's what he calls the anchor asset. How do you know that name? Because my forensic division was approached in July about doing an independent review out there, he said. I turned it down. Conflict one of my long-term clients is on the other side of it. He turned his coffee cup around. There's litigation, Mr. Kaskinen. It's active. Investors are alleging misrepresentation, $6.2 million in claimed damages. And then he said the thing that put a hole through me. The specific allegation is falsified third-party inspection certifications, structural steel sign-offs and fire suppression certs that were submitted to the county with signatures on them from an inspection firm that says it never did the work. I want you to understand what I felt in that airport bar. I spent 36 years of my life being the wall between what a building is and what somebody says it is. That signature, a weld inspector's stamp on a certification that is the whole job. That's the entire thing. It says a man with a probe and a certificate stood there and looked, and it's sound. My whole life. My entire working life was that stamp meaning something, and my daughter's husband had been forging them, and he had a document in a manila folder with my name typed across the top. Look, if you've made it this far with me, hit subscribe, because there's a good deal more to this, and the part that actually changed me hasn't happened yet. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it says on the clock where you are. I like knowing who's sitting with me. I flew home that afternoon with Emeka's card in my shirt pocket and a knot in my gut that stayed with me over Kansas. I still had those 4 shirts. I hung them in my hall closet on Vermilion Road, still in the plastic, and I stood there and looked at them for a while before I picked up the phone and called Bud Tervo. Bud and I go back to 1978. Retired tug captain, worked the harbor and the street Marys for 31 years, lives 4 streets over. Married 44 years to Arlene, who makes a cardamom bread that ought to be regulated. Bud is the kind of man who tells you the truth whether or not it improves your evening. We sat on my back porch that night with 2 beers neither of us finished, in that early September cold that comes off Superior when the sun goes down. I told him all of it. Rollie, he said when I was done, you know what that paper does if you sign it? Tell me anyway. I want to hear you say it. It puts his name on your house. Joint tenancy. Near as I understand these things. Which means if that lawsuit goes the way it sounds like it's going, and a judgment lands on him personally, his creditors can reach any asset with his name on it, including a house in Duluth, Minnesota, that he has never paid $1 of tax on. I said, so it's a shield, or collateral, or both. Bud set his bottle down. Closing timing, he said. There's your closing timing. He needs an asset that isn't tangled up yet. Or he needs your credit, and he needs it before that suit locks down everything he's got. Then he said the sentence I couldn't get around for about a week. That folder wasn't about probate, Rollie. That folder was about keeping his company breathing another 6 months. And your girl carried it to the table. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Sawyer on that patio with a flashlight in his teeth explaining dew point. And about the fact that in 3 days in that house, that 14-year-old boy was the only person who asked me a single question that wasn't going somewhere. I called Dot Hiverin the next morning and drove down to Superior Street with the folder in my bag. She read it twice. Then she took her glasses off and set them on the desk and looked at me the way a person looks at you right before they say something they'd rather not. Rollie, this is not simple estate planning. She tapped the page. This converts sole ownership into joint tenancy with right of survivorship. The second you sign, they are legal co-owners. Not when you die. Immediately, but I keep living there. You do. The retained life estate handles that. What it does not do is protect the property from claims against either of their names. If a judgment comes down against him, and from what you're telling me, one is coming a creditor can absolutely put a lien on his ownership interest in your house. I sat with that. So I'd have handed my house to his lawsuit. You'd have handed half of it to his lawsuit, she said. And once your daughter's name is on there, any proceeding involving either of them, divorce, bankruptcy, anything, and that house stops being yours to protect. Then she said something I've repeated to about a dozen people since. I've been doing this 31 years, Rollie. Documents like this do not show up by accident. Somebody who knew exactly what they were doing built this to look boring. I sat in her conference room for a long time afterward looking out at the lake, thinking about Junie, and about how many times over the years she'd said times Tessa has good instincts, Rollie, leave her be, and wondering exactly when those instincts had gotten overwritten by somebody else's. I did not call my daughter that day. I did not call her the next day either. I let 3 full days go by without a word, and I want to say something about that, because people ask me about the silence more than anything else. Silence isn't nothing. Silence is a decision. Every hour I didn't call her, I spent instead with Dot, with Bud, and eventually with an accountant Dot recommended named Nadia Volk, going through exactly what my financial footprint looked like inside my daughter's life. Because it turned out the deed was not the whole of it. It wasn't close. I'd been paying Sawyer's tuition at Ridgeland Academy for 4 years. $5,200 a semester wired straight to the school. Something I offered and never once regretted, because that was for him. I'd co-signed a $71,000 note 2 years back on a Ram 3000, 500 and a gooseneck trailer for Brant's business, because his commercial credit wouldn't carry it alone. A thing I had genuinely forgotten about until Nadia pulled the report, and there it was, my name, my social security number. On equipment I have never once ridden in. And then there was the one I didn't know about at all. $750 a month. Automatic. Into an account labeled, in my own banking app, Tessa Checking. I started that 2 months after Junie's funeral, because Tessa called me one night crying about how tight things were, and I set it up in about 4 minutes and never touched it again. 4 years. $36,000. On top of the tuition. On top of the note. And at the end of all that, what I got was a curb, 2 bags, 4 shirts, and 8 words through a windshield. I called Emeka on the 4th day. Not about the deed, about the conference. I told him yes, I'd come, and I'd be honored. And somewhere in that conversation I mentioned what Dot and Nadia had turned up. He went quiet again in that same careful way. Sir, I know 2 of the attorneys on the investor side. Not well, professionally. If you want as a friend, not as anything else, I can make an introduction, and you can find out exactly what he's carrying before you decide anything about your house. I said yes. 12 days later, I had a very careful, very lawyerly phone call with a woman in Texas who told me more than I expected and less than she probably wanted to. The certifications had been submitted to the county, with a licensed inspector's stamp on them. That inspector had given a sworn statement that he had never set foot on the site. 2 of the retaining walls on the north end had already moved. Remediation, the investors said, should have been done properly in the first place, ran about $840,000. And the county was doing its own review, separate from the civil suit, that could turn into a criminal referral if intentional falsification got proven out. So he wasn't just facing a judgment, he was facing charges. And he had needed my house, or my credit, or both, inside the next several weeks. I sat with all of that for 2 more days, and then I called my daughter. Now I want to slow this down, because this call is the whole thing, and it did not go the way I had rehearsed it in my kitchen for 2 days. She answered on the second ring, which surprised me. Dad, hey, I've been meaning to call, it's been insane. And I kept my voice level. 36 years of telling project managers things they did not want to hear will teach you to keep your voice level. I need you to listen and not talk for a minute. Can you do that? A pause. Okay. I had read the deed. I know what it actually does. I know it puts Brant's name on my house immediately, not someday. I know about Kestrel Crossing. I know about the inspection certifications. I heard her breath change. I know roughly what he's facing. And I know that document was built to get recorded before that lawsuit touched anything else he owns. The silence went on long enough that I looked at the screen to see if the call had dropped. Dad, it's not what you... I'm not finished. Still level, still calm. That was the hardest part of the whole thing. I flew 2,000 miles because you asked me to. And on Monday you dropped me at a curb 5 hours early and handed me your husband's dry cleaning. I let that sit. And I want to be clear with you about something. That's the part I care about, not the deed. The deed is paper. Can handle paper. I said, it's the curb, Tessa. And my daughter made a sound on the other end of that line that I had not heard out of her since she was 19 years old. Not crying. Something before crying. That catch. And then it came apart, and what came out of her over the next 20 minutes was not what I was braced for at all. She told me the lawsuit paperwork had been served at the house on the Thursday before I flew in. The day before, she told me she'd found out about the certifications the same way I did from a lawyer, not from her husband. 6 days before I got on that plane. She told me she had been managing that man's moods for 2 years, and a 14-year-old boy at the same time, and had not slept properly since March. And then she said the thing I have not been able to put down since. She said, I couldn't do you too, Dad. I said, do me? And my daughter said, every time you call, the first thing you say is Mom's name. I want you to sit with that, because I had to. Every single time. 90 seconds in, minimum. And I know you need that. I know you do, but I can't. I have never once been able to, and every time you say it I have to hold something down for the rest of the day, and I can't hold anything else down right now. I have nothing left. And then, quieter. And the money made it worse. The money times help times you, I said. The money reminded me, she said. Every month, on the 11th, that I owed you a daughter I couldn't be. And she said, so I stopped calling. And then I felt guilty. And then I called less. And then she said the sentence that ended the argument I'd been having in my own head for 11 days. I left you there because I knew you'd forgive me. You're the only person left in my life I was sure about. I sat in my kitchen on Vermilion Road with the phone against my ear, and I did not say anything for a while. Because here's the thing. That is not an excuse. I want to be very plain. She still carried that folder to that island. She still said the words about probate. She still had a document in her house that would have handed my home to her husband's creditors, and she knew what it was, because Brant is not smart enough to have built it alone, and she is not stupid enough not to have understood it. Being at the end of your rope explains a great deal. It does not explain a notarized deed, but it explained the curb. And the curb was the part that had been keeping me up. If you have ever gotten the real reason for something out of somebody you love, and found that it made things worse and better at the exact same time, you already know that there is no place to put a feeling like that. You just carry it around. So here's what I said. I'm not signing it. Not now, not later, not in any version. I know. And I'm done being the floor under Brant's business. The $750 a month stops this week. And I'm getting my name off that truck note. You two refinance it in his name or you sell it, but the lender's going to hear from inside 10 days. She didn't argue. That surprised me too. And then I said the part I'd written down on a piece of paper so I wouldn't get it wrong. Sawyer's tuition doesn't change, not $1 of it. That was never for you, and it was never for him. That's for that boy, and it stays exactly as it is, and I want you to hear me say that clearly so nobody in that house is confused about it. She started crying again. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm stopping. Those are different, and I need you to learn the difference, because I'm 69 and I'm not going to get many more chances to teach you anything. 2 weeks later, Drew up an amended will. The house on Vermilion Road, and the bulk of what's in my retirement accounts sits in an irrevocable trust with one beneficiary, Sawyer Roland Vaughn, administered until he's 26, with his education funded regardless of anything that happens to either of his parents. Tessa is in there, a real amount, not a symbolic one. I couldn't cut my daughter out, and I didn't try, and I want to say for the record that I never once considered it seriously. Brant Vaughn's name does not appear anywhere in any document I own. And then I did something I had never done in 14 years, which is that I called my grandson directly on his own phone. I'd always felt like that was going around his parents. Turns out, that was just another way of asking permission to be in somebody's life. I told him I wanted to keep doing the weather thing, video calls, visits, whatever worked. And I told him that whatever was going on between me and his folks changed exactly nothing about him and me. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "Mom's been weird since like July. I didn't know why." And then he said, "I'm glad you're not mad at me." I told that boy I could not be mad at him if I worked at it for 100 years. February came and I flew to Kansas City. On my own dime, in my own hotel, on my own terms. 600 and some people in a ballroom. Inspectors, engineers, QA managers, people from every yard and refinery, and DOT in the country. And on the second evening, Emeka Oduya stood at a podium under a light and told a room full of strangers about a harbor in Duluth in 2001, about a supervisor who made him grind out a weld 4 times in one afternoon and never once told him he was doing fine when he wasn't. He said everything he'd built in 20 years came out of 18 months of somebody being hard on him for the right reasons. And then he said my name, and I walked up onto a stage in front of 600 people, and a 46-year-old man who employs 84 of them shook my hand like I was the most important person in that building. At dinner afterward, he offered me a standing role, senior consultant on his forensic division. Part-time, my own schedule, most of it from home, fly out when it's worth flying out. And he was very firm that it wasn't charity. Almost stern about it, which I found funny, because that's exactly how I used to be with him. He said, "I've got sharp young techs. I don't have anybody who reads a seam the way you read a seam. I want that back in the building." I said yes before he finished the sentence. Now here's the part where I come off worse than my daughter, and I've been circling it this whole time, so let me just say it. When Tessa told me the money reminded her every month that she owed me a daughter she couldn't be, I got off that call and I felt righteous for about 6 hours. And then somewhere around 2 in the morning I got up and stood in my kitchen and understood something I did not want to understand. I never asked her for anything. Not once in 4 years. Not a phone call, not a visit, not an hour. Not once did I say times Tessa, "I need you to call me on Sundays," or times Tessa, "I would like to come see you," or times "I'm having a bad week and I'd like to talk to my daughter." Not one time. Because if I asked and she said no, then I'd know. And as long as I never asked, I never had to find out. So instead I sent $750 a month and paid a tuition bill and put my name on a truck loan. And I told myself that was generosity. And some of it was. But underneath it, and I did not see this for 4 years, I was buying a reason to still be in their lives. Because being times needed, times was something I knew how to be. I'd been needed my whole working life. Being times wanted, times just wanted, for nothing. By somebody who didn't require anything from me. I had no idea how to ask for that. I don't think I ever have. So my daughter was running a transaction on me, and I was running the exact same transaction on her from the other side. 2 people paying each other so neither one had to find out if there was anything underneath it. That's the whole story. That's what a curb in San Antonio cost me to learn, and I'd say I got it cheap. So here's what I'd want you to actually take out of this, and it's not what you think. Everybody who hears this story says the lesson is times love, that only shows up when it needs something isn't love. And that's true, and it's fine, and you've heard it before. The one nobody says is the other half of it. If you have made yourself endlessly useful to somebody, and you have never once asked them for a single thing, you have not actually found out whether they love you. You have made it impossible to find out. And you did that on purpose, and so did I. So here's the one thing you can do this week, and it will feel much stupider than it is. Call somebody you love and ask them for something small that you do not need. A ride you could take yourself. A recipe. Help moving a table you could move alone. Ask them to come sit with you on a Tuesday for no reason. Ask for something, let them answer. Because being able to ask is the only way you ever find out whether you're wanted or just useful, and if you have never asked, then you have never once let them show you. And here's what I'd like you sitting with tonight when the house goes quiet. When is the last time you let somebody do something for you that you were perfectly capable of doing yourself? Kestrel Crossing settled in April, for an amount I'm told took most of what was left. Vaughan Meridian Partners dissolved sometime in the summer. There was no criminal referral in the end, and I have made my peace with not knowing exactly why. Tessa and I are somewhere, not fixed, somewhere. She calls now. Not every Sunday, but real calls, 20 and 30 minutes, and in November she asked me a question about her mother. First time in 4 years. She asked me what Junie was like at 25. I talked for 40 minutes and she let me, and at the end of it she said, "Okay, that was good. That was enough for now." And I said okay. And I didn't push, which for me is a considerable amount of growth at 69 years old. Bud comes over most Fridays with 2 beers and Arlene's cardamom bread, and we sit on that porch and talk about absolutely nothing important, which after all this has come to seem like the most important thing there is. Emeka and I talk about weld procedures most weeks, and sometimes about nothing at all. And every Sunday at 6 my phone rings and it's Sawyer, usually somewhere between a physics problem and a complaint about his science teacher, who apparently does not explain barometric pressure to his satisfaction. He sent me a barometer for Christmas, built the housing himself out of white oak, and it is not quite square, and it hangs on my kitchen wall on Vermilion Road. And every morning I tap the glass with one knuckle before I make coffee, the way my own father used to, and I watch that needle move a hair. That's it. That's the whole ritual. Takes a second. I think about that curb sometimes. 101 degrees, 4 shirts on wire hangers, 35 minutes of being absolutely certain I had been left with nothing. I hadn't been left with nothing. I'd been left standing in the one spot on earth where somebody who'd been looking for me since June was going to walk past in 35 minutes. I don't know what to do with that. I've stopped trying to make it mean something tidy. But I will say this. Sometimes the worst afternoon of your life is just somebody clearing a space at the curb so a better car can pull up. So before you go, I'd like to hear from you, and I mean it. Comment a 1 if you think I was right to cut the money off but keep paying that boy's tuition that you can shut a door on the adults and hold it open for the kid. Comment a 2 if you think I should have cut every last dollar of it, tuition included, and let that whole household feel the full weight of what they did. And comment a 3 if you think the thing I actually got wrong was the 4 years before any of it, the $750 a month I sent instead of ever once asking my own daughter to pick up the phone. Number 3 is the one I want to hear about, honestly, because that's the one I'm still not finished with. And tell me where you're watching from tonight, and what that clock says where you are. Somebody's got this on at 2 in the morning in a kitchen with one light over the stove, and I'd like to know you're out there, because I have sat in that kitchen and it is a long room at that hour. Most of all, tell me if you've lived some version of this, if you've ever been invited somewhere and found out afterward that you were the agenda, if somebody has ever made you feel like a resource with a face on it. You're not being sensitive. You notice something real. Noticing it isn't the hard part. Asking for something afterward, that's the hard part, and I was 4 years late to it, and I'd rather you weren't. If this one got to you tonight, subscribe before you go. That's the one thing that actually keeps this going. I put a new story up every week and the next one's already written, and I think it'll sit on you the same way this one still sits on me. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of it. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Duluth, Minnesota to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.